so glad to see you guys. I'm glad everybody's back safely, having had a break, and um, I'm really excited about tonight. I'm going to do the same thing I did with the Greece presentation, and I'm going to go straight through, um, and then we will have a little discussion afterwards. Um, does anybody have questions in the beginning or anything, any thoughts or reflections from the Greece presentation that you'd like to ask before we dive in to the Philippines? Okay, well, maybe something else will come to you or jog your memory. And I encourage you to keep something handy to write on and write with. And that way, if you see something and you want to circle back and see that photograph again or ask more questions about it, perhaps, or if you have other thoughts from my presentation, that way you can remember it. Because if you're like me, by the time I get to the end of the presentation, I've forgotten what I wanted to ask. So keep something handy so you can write that down and remember when we come back from the end. All right, now let me get to my sharing. Okay. All right. And might let's see. Okay. So um I might ask you to mute just in case that way sometimes the audio gets kind of warbly if two people are talking at the same time. That way everyone can hear really well. So this was an immersion trip to the Philippines as part of a study program. I received a fellowship from the Christian Church Disciples of Christ in 2025, and we're called Global Theological Fellows. Oh, here comes Sarah. Let's make sure she gets in here. So the Global Theological Fellows are offered to 10 seminarians, and it's designed to introduce us to the global church. The experience includes the theology of global ministry, learning from global partners, and exploring the impact of global voices on the church today. It consisted of a year-long commitment of independent study, online workshops, and this international immersion trip. And Lee Yates is the man in blue in the picture there. This is the leadership team that traveled with us. And Lee pastors a church in Southern California and is also the assistant director of HELM, Higher Education and Leadership Ministries for the Christian Church Disciples of Christ. And he said, immersion is worth 1,000 sermons. And man, if that is not an understatement. Uh, wow, I had no idea that I knew I was going to learn a lot, but I had no idea that it was going to go as deep as it has, and I'm really excited to share that with you. The other partners that put the program together is Week of Compassion. V. Wynn is to Lee's left there, and he is the head of that nonprofit, which is also a division of the Christian Church. And then also Global Ministries is a partnership with the United Church of Christ and Disciples Overseas Ministries. And Kristen Wixel Johnson is the lady on the far right, and she is the one of the representatives of Global Ministries that traveled with us. The woman next to her, Tamara Rodenberg, she is the head of HELM and really the brain trust. Wow, I'm impressed with this woman. And then Brandon Johnson is on the far left, and he came along. He pastors a church in Southern California, but he came as the chaplain for the students on this trip. And then the other folks that I traveled with, make sure I've got my there. So here are the Global Theological Fellows. I won't go through names and all that, but we are all converging on San Francisco here at this airport. And we came from all over the country, multiple states, and at least, see, Vanderbilt, um, Lexington Theological Seminary, CTS in Indianapolis, University of Chicago, um, Bright Divinity School, and Phillips Theological Seminary were all represented on this trip. So this is the group of fellows that traveled together. So in my final reflection paper regarding this trip, I wrote about accompaniment and how this concept kept showing up through our trip. So these are the stories and the lessons that I want to share with you today. How journeying together is where the Christian ecclesia is most alive. And you're going to learn a new Greek word too. But first, I want to return to Greece and just remind us of the lessons that I brought back from there. While the class was oriented in the archaeological and historical look at the Apostle Paul's journey in Greece, alongside those named in the New Testament, I also brought my own question of what did Paul really mean by ecclesia? And as I shared a couple of weeks ago, the original meaning of ecclesia is a civic assembly. And Paul used that familiar language and understanding to help people understand what it meant to be an assembly of the way of Jesus. So, this new way of being an assembly moved people from just gathering as a select group to being a part of a whole body, what we call the body of Christ, and where each part of the body is valued and where all people are indispensable. This is what makes the Christian ecclesia special. In a world where people are subjected, marginalized, and excluded by empires, Christ invites us to subvert those systems and behaviors in favor of what I refer to as setting one table for all people. And to do that, we must learn a new way, a more sacred way of belonging to each other. So I flew across two oceans to see the Christian ecclesia in action. And that gave me another Greek word, koinonia. I had always translated koinonia as fellowship, but it is so much more than that, as I learned on this trip. If ecclesia is a sacred way of learning to belong to each other, then koinonia is the active sharing of life together that makes that belonging visible. It's the lived expression of belonging to each other. This photo is taken in a pineapple field on a farm that we visited, whose family has been there for generations, but are being forced out by development. This is a whole community problem and a whole community solution, hopefully. In koinonia, I may wear the robe, or leaders may set a vision, but we all do the work. All parts of the body, remember, are indispensable. So all of your gifts are indispensable. Koinonia shares, feeds, hopes, listens, worships, receives, gives, and accompanies. The African principle of Ubuntu is similar. Our lives are interconnected, and each person's flourishing is tied to the flourishing of others. That is central to my growing understanding of koinonia. Koinonia demonstrates mutual care and concern, accepts shared responsibility for one another, and accompanies one another in times of both joy and struggle. Even my understanding of solidarity has grown. Someone said solidarity, which moved it then for me from a sentimental notion across oceans to active and tangible hope. We went to a local fishing community that had just received notice that their homes would be demolished the next day. The houses were too small to fit us all in, so we broke up into small groups. The picture on the left is one of the small groups. The fisherman on the right was in my group and said that he had been fighting reclamation projects for 8 years. Originally, he'd moved off the site to a housing project that they provided, but it was too far from the shore where all of their equipment and livelihood exists. Another nonprofit had been working with them to try and negotiate with the developers, but it appeared time was running out. They had already lost a huge part of the community when someone sent in people at night to burn down their homes. The site that you are seeing here is the area that had been burned and then later scraped to make way for a large fishing industry, buildings and equipment. And as we were visiting there, I mean, that whole area was probably, I was estimating it probably was, maybe a mile of shoreline and maybe, oh gosh, 1,000 acres. I mean, it was not a small village, it was a large fishing community. The buildings that are still standing probably looked like maybe a third of the community. And then this is just a snapshot of one direction. I would quadruple what you're looking here in the distance as to the size of the community that had been scraped already or been demolished already. Um, and we were sitting there in the living room with him and asking, what can we do? Here we are, we're getting ready to go back to the United States, but what can we do for you? And he said, you're already doing it. Your presence here, your physical presence brings us hope. By being here in person and hearing our stories, we know that you're going to go home and tell people what's happening here. That was probably the toughest day. We saw a lot of challenging circumstances and conditions. But this right here is a children's playground. They make kites out of trash bags and fly them running through this. Their whole communities gathering and eating and talking on their front porches, and trying to spend as much time together as they can until they wake up and it's more of this. Plumeria trees bloom in the heat, through drought, along busy roads and in quiet, untended spaces. They don't wait for ideal conditions before producing beauty. And resilience works this way too. I spent that week meeting people who continue to choose hope amid injustice, earthquakes, typhoons and tsunamis, poverty, and uncertainty. But they just keep planting. They keep serving. They keep welcoming strangers. They keep believing that love can change the world. And it is every single day. We saw it there, and I see it here at home. The farmers that we met with have a saying, plant until the soil is good. The plumeria reminds us that resilience isn't simply surviving difficult seasons. Resilience continues to bloom through those tough seasons. One of the lessons our partners taught us wasn't in a classroom. It was in how they welcomed us. We had so many wonderful mentors. I just want to call out Mama Urbano right here. She is the newly elected head of the United Church of Christ in the Philippines. So new, it's not even up on the website yet. But Marma is among the whole team of people from the National Council of Churches in the Philippines, which is a collaboration of Protestant denominations all working together in humanitarian workways. And the United Church of Christ, we got to meet with their disaster relief.
Yeah, brown rice, black beans.
Dave, you need to mute, please. We got to meet with their disaster relief and recovery team that had just returned from some of the southern islands that were impacted by earthquakes just 2 days before we got there. And it was really eye-opening to see how they go in and actually do that work and make a difference and turn whole communities around. And when they had over 30 churches, which would have normally served as shelters, that had been impacted, they were telling us what they had already done and what the 3-month plan was for getting those churches back online, basically, with very portable solar panel systems that they're already there in the islands. They can bring and get up immediately so they can get solar power to be able to operate. It's fascinating. So, back to this. Global ministry isn't about bringing God somewhere because God is already there. Love lives there. Our calling is to arrive with enough humility to notice. When we were in this fishing community, I had a moment that I realized how hard it is sometimes to accept, to receive from people, particularly when they have so little to give. And we were leaving this community and heading back to our vans. And a young boy, probably 11 or 12 years old, junior high, looked like maybe, he stopped me on the way out. And he did this with a few of us that passed his way. But he held out his hand and he took my hand in his and he put my hand to his forehead and never dropped his gaze. That is a sign of deep respect in their culture and a way of him seeing and recognizing what we were doing there for them, even as little as it was, other than observing, being present, telling stories. But that was his way of saying, I see you. Thank you for seeing me. So, living koinonia, we arrive with humility and we listen before we speak. I heard stories of these blue walls going up on people's property. Can you see that there on the left? These are blue metal walls. And what was happening in this particular farming community, the woman whose property we were on, she gave us a tour of the entire farm. That's where the pineapple fields were. They grow coffee, pineapple, bananas, a number of things. And they were having developers come in and basically put fencing up on their property, locking them out of parts of their property and literally pulling in, building new home development. This is a picture from her property on a rise where I could get up high enough to see the houses that had been built on the other side of the fence. Um, Let me see. Let me get back here to my notes. So, in her case, these are her family's ancestral lands. Um, they're used to feed whole communities. And when these families started resisting, the people putting up the fences, working for the developers, um, would start coming in the middle of the night. And you might say, well, if they own the property, how can they do that? Well, it's really no different than the Native American Indians. So their culture historically didn't need paper. I mean, the community is self-sufficient. Everybody looks out for each other, provides for each other, does their part. And so, for all these generations, at least from the 1800s, her family had been farming that land. And so, there's no paper to defend them legally. And so, all they can do is basically physically resist. And the community comes together when these trucks show up to start putting up fences. And I'm going to show you this picture here on the right. Um, this gentleman is part of that community, and the bell above him, that metal piece is a church bell. This is a little chapel, and that church bell no longer rings to tell people to come to worship. The church bell is used to warn the whole town when the trucks show up in the middle of the night to start putting up fences on more farms to warn everybody so they can get up and get out. Because if they go and they resist, they stand, on their property, the people that have been putting up the fences, they won't do it. So it's probably just a matter of time. But right now, they seem to be able to ward them off. But once those fences are in place, they don't, they're not able to get them down easily. So it's just really to hear their stories. It's really hard to see how all of this is happening, and I just couldn't help but think this is happening everywhere and has been happening for millennia, and certainly has happened here on our soil as well. So, also, when living in koinonia, we receive graciously before we give. We honor that person and their gift. Our humble acceptance is a gift to them. Everywhere we went, no matter the circumstances, they fed us. Um, this is fresh pineapple in the bowl. And the yellow is not banana, it is cassava root. And I just want to tell you, when you wrap cassava root with their version of brown sugar that still has most of the molasses still in it, you wrap it in a banana leaf and you steam it. It is the most addictive treat. That became one of my favorite snacks on the trip. So everywhere we looked, people were setting tables, literal meals, shared stories, laughing, playing, questioning, strategizing on how to keep those fences off their property. And we were part of one of those meetings, praying and worshiping, celebrating, and accompanying. We stayed 2 nights in a dormitory at a seminary. Oh, this is more of my table pictures here. Um, we went to a restaurant that's local food, and they did what we do with somebody has a birthday. They come around loud and clap and sing and do all that. And the picture on the left is a worship service at the National Council of Churches, our very first time in worship together. And their tradition is to process in every person, each person, not just the people part of the service, but each attendee processes in with something that is precious to them and lays it on the altar and shares it. Um, I shared the Ecclesia Journal because that's precious to me. Um, all right, so here we are. We're at the seminary, and we stayed 2 nights in the dormitories there. These are some of the professors, and the woman holding the sash is the dean of students. Um, and when we were there, we've been talking so much about accompaniment. And so we asked them, what does accompaniment mean to them? And so here are some of their responses: mutuality, communion, respect, and empowerment. Enter into our souls with their soul. Offer our lives for the sake of the other. We accompany because we have the same stories. Putting your whole self in the journey. And this is where this came from, solidarity. So while we were gathered there with the dean, she told us about the justice work that some of the students have been doing with another farming community. And that community had formed a protest camp and a community farm of about 300 hectares, which is about 750 acres. So it's a nice size community farm. And then came the moment that tied Greece and the Philippines together for me. The protest village had asked for someone to come lead worship. They decided that they wanted to begin worshiping together, even though worship is really enmeshed in everything in the Koinonia community. And they'd been doing so much sacred life together. Sorry, I keep losing my control here. There. This is the larger group that came to worship with us on that Sunday. The hearts are just covering the faces of the children. Find my place. So they wanted to, they've been doing life together and building this community farm and protest camp. And they decided that they wanted to start worshiping together. So they reached out to the dean of the seminary because some of the seminarians had actually been doing some of this protest and justice work with them. And they said, we would really like to start having Sunday worship services, and maybe some of the seminarians would like to come and lead worship. And so the dean was trying to figure out, okay, how are we going to do this? This is the seminary chapel. It's called the Salicot Chapel because the dome is shaped exactly like my hat. And it's a beautiful open air chapel where we also worshiped with the rest of the seminarians. So this is back at the protest camp. So the dean said, she said, tell me about the people in the camp, what's their religious tradition? And can you give me a sense of what the community is used to? So I can figure out how we can best serve you for worship. And that's Miriam, the protest camp leader. And so she said the farming community is largely Roman Catholic, and the seminary is progressive Protestant. And so she was trying to figure out, okay, how am I going to do something that is, meaningful and sacred for this Roman Catholic community? And Miriam said, you know, we don't care about all of that. We just want to worship with those who have been journeying with us. This was my aha moment on the trip. We just want to worship with those who have been journeying with us. No denominationalism or sectarianism, no doctrinal concerns, just seeing the image of God in each other and accompanying them, learning to belong to each other and journeying together. That is the heart of global ministry. Belonging is not sentimental because once you belong to each other, one another's suffering matters. Another person's flourishing matters. This is a carabao and the farmer. If you are familiar with the African proverb, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. Watching this farmer lead his carabao, I was reminded that not every journey is meant to be hurried. The strongest partnerships aren't built by pulling harder, they're built through trust, patience, and learning one another's pace. The farmer doesn't drag the animal, they move together. And faith should work that way too. We don't transform the world by rushing ahead of one another. We move forward together, carrying the work with patience, humility, and shared purpose. In our final paper and trip follow-up that we were asked to write, they gave us a question. How has your experience as a global theological fellow impacted your understanding of the global church? This experience, particularly the immersion trip, has taught me a new understanding of journeying together. While I have long appreciated relationships and a sense of belonging, the opportunities to interact with ministry partners and local communities there helped me see the church as an active network of people and communities engaging in God's work across cultures and contexts and traditions. The diversity of the Christian ecclesia that I witnessed in the Philippines revealed an active recognition of the image of God in each other and demonstrated the body of Christ at work through the partnerships and sharing of information, gifts, and ministry. At our closing worship, we were asked to leave our shoes at the altar during the service. And at the end, we paired up with one another, offering one of our sandals to them as a visual reminder that when we walk together, I am walking with and for you, and you are walking with and for me. The global church is present anywhere that people recognize the image of God in each other and walk together in solidarity and accompaniment. And it's also clear to me that humanitarian work creates the space for the Christian ecclesia to grow closer and stronger, laying aside sectarianism and divisive issues in favor of the greater good. And finally, faith is not primarily an individual endeavor. We encounter Christ in one another. We can only recognize the image of God in one another. And we grow in our discipleship through relationships that cross boundaries of division and exclusion and draw us into God's ongoing work of healing, justice, and compassion for all people. So I want to leave you with a question to ponder, to meditate on, to pray about, to journal about, and we can begin a discussion tonight and continue that discussion in maybe next week, or not sure the schedule exactly, but I'm hoping that next week we circle back on the things that we heard about Greece and the Philippines, and I'll guide us in some conversation questions around both of those lessons that came from both of those experiences. So the question I want to leave you with to ponder is what does journeying together require that simply helping others does not? So that is the end of this PowerPoint. Now you can come off mute and we can talk a little bit. What jumped out at you? Do you have questions? Want me to circle back on anything? Rick.
Hi. When you were showing us the fishing village that was being torn down, um, the house where they're being replaced the next day, could the fishermen still go to where they were to go fish, or were they taking that entire area, the waterfront and all?
Well, I think the plan was to take the entire area because they're scraping it to put, build something there. Um, these are industries that the reclamation projects of the coast have been going on for a long time. I would say easily a decade and maybe 20 years in that area. We went to a mall in Manila and it was on Manila Bay and just across the street from the bay. And we went there for dinner, and then they said you can go, free time, go explore the mall and I found the cultural store where I could, get souvenirs and gifts for people. And we had a fine time. And of course, we're still kind of reeling from our time at the fishing community. And but we got our gifts to bring home. We were going to be leaving a day and a half later, and so we were leaving the mall and waiting out on the kind of the front patio area of the mall for our drivers to come back with the vans. When one of the translators said to us, all of this, as far as you can see, both directions, is reclaimed land.
Mm.
I mean, it just like, okay, can I return all the stuff I just bought? It just felt horrible, right? Uh, because I felt like I was supporting that. Um, but to answer your question, Rick, you saw a lot of the trash. Some of that was from the demolition, but we also had when we were standing by the boats. There's a lot of trash and other stuff that's washing up on shore, and they don't know where that's coming from exactly. But I would say something has gotten stirred up because they said that some of the big industry that's doing fishing with the big machinery, it's impacting reefs. The areas that have the grasses where the fish hide in the grasses, that's where they do most of their fishing, and those grasses are being destroyed. So they may still find a place to have access to with their boats, maybe. But the the ecological impact of the big machinery is also creating problems. So it's not just relocating their houses, it's definitely impacting their entire livelihoods.
But I mean, if they can't take the boats out and they can't go fishing because all that area is being reclaimed, what are they going to do?
Yeah.
Exactly. They didn't know. We asked that. Yes, Tracy.
I mean, there's only so many Chick-fil-A's you can work at.
And that's just it. They're in a community where we didn't see fast food and things like that. That's an area that's pretty remote. It's out. We drove about 2 hours south of Manila when we went first to the seminary and then the surrounding farming communities, and then we probably drove another 45 minutes to the coast, to that fishing community. And so it's still relatively remote. Um, yeah, uh, it's really, really tough. Anyway, Tracy, there you are.
Well,
I don't know how many people were displaced from having a place to live, but where did they go? Did they help them find a place or?
So they offered them what I called projects. I didn't see them, so I don't know the condition. They did provide or offer them housing. They wanted to relocate them. And this man that I was in my group, the man you saw on the right, he went originally. But the problem was it was too far from shore. I didn't see a lot of cars. I saw bicycles and stuff, but this community, it's like they don't need, I mean, it's a self-sustained community, right? So they take their stuff to a wet and a dry market and sell it there. So it's not like they're having to get their fish or their scallops or any of that to a big thing that's going to take it then to get it to a grocery store. I mean, it's they're selling it and feeding a community. Um, so when they moved them into the housing they provided them in, it was too far away to do their jobs, to fish, too far away to go back and forth with their wares. And then to Rick's point, what's going to happen to their boats and their equipment?
Yeah, that's a lot like what happened over in this country with Native Americans.
That's exactly right. Yeah. Anantha, did you have
Yeah, I'm um, listening to your presentation and the visuals, the photograph took me back to my own village where my dad was a pastor, and so we went from village to village when he was transferred for the church service, and so there would be group of theologians from England who would visit my dad's, church and the parsonage, spend some time. So when you're actually saying that you lived in the dorm there and all that stuff, took me back literally, 9 years old. I was 9 years old. I was taking these pastors, theologians from England by hand. Literally, I would lead them through the jungle into fishing places, and this is melancholic. It just brought it back. And the difference also is that several theologians went back. They came back and stayed for up to a year uh, of just beyond getting to know their history and the trials and tribulations they were facing. So some of them would talk to each other when I would be listening as a child, and it's almost like their observations revolve around clash of civilizations, almost like uh, modernity versus tradition. Um, and with modernity brings all these challenges of resettlements, reclamation, garbage, trash. I'm seeing that in my own house here, although I live alone, of course, Raj is now joining me as my son for a while this summer. But the garbage I produce every week, I mean, just it's unthinkable in villages of India or villages of Philippines or Asia, whatever it is. I mean, just the trash that we produce. Although I separate the recycling with trash and maintain the bins and all that stuff, just the enormous amounts of trash that I was seeing in the slides that you presented, how it was all washing ashore. This is all the product of modernity. I mean, the packages, the things, even the villages of India now are receiving packaged goods and things like that. And, where does that trash go? They don't have trash bins inside the house. Most of the huts don't have trash bins to collect them, you know, they just go throw it on the street.
Mm.
Um, and that's the challenge that we as people of faith, how do we, you know, work that through that challenge of what the Western civilization or what the colonial rule has brought to these traditional societies, along with their faith and religion. Lots of negative things also came, and how to separate those aspects and how to develop this koinonia, you know, the one you are mentioning, the journeying together, those kind of things, you know, puts us in a new light. But
You know, Anantha, I bet you anything those two that you mentioned that came and stayed for a year or more,
yeah,
I bet you anything it was the hospitality of the Indians and their
yeah.
journey with them that made them not want to go back. I
Ah,
feel like that when I'm with Ranu and you and Seema and Shivani. I don't want to go back either.
I know. That simplicity of living and, you know, just
Right.
bare minimum existence. But the joy you see in their faces,
Mhm.
that
Simplicity of life.
sort of thing. Yeah, you know, it's very special.
December.
First, thank you for sharing that with us. Thank you for taking the time to put together that beautiful presentation. The struggle with the people coming in the night and putting up the fences and taking land, that actually reminds me very much of the heirs property disputes that we have here in South Carolina. Down in Beaufort and the Low Country, we have a lot of similar situation taking place
Hmm.
with the heirs land disputes. If you look up that, it's the same situation where big construction companies are coming in and um, basically snapping up land because it was handed down from the slaves, free slaves, to generation, hundreds of years, and all that paperwork is not really as in order for that reason. And so they just go around, they find loopholes to snap up the property from the air. So there's a lot of that going on in the low country of South Carolina. So that reminded me of that situation. Um, there was actually a one that caught national attention that was over there near um, the name is skipping me. Key, what's the island? No, it's Key something. But up here in the upstate of South Carolina, um, it's something island.
Kiowa.
Kiowa. Thank you. I was like, what is the name of that? It's a black woman in her 90s, and it was a situation like that. I think she finally ended up winning that situation where they tried to take up lots of her land, and it was one of those situations where it's an heirs situation that's very similar to this situation that you described. The other thing that was significant to me was that um, I am never, I'm always amazed at how much. I have not traveled out of the country very much except for to Africa, and specifically Gambia, because that's where my husband's family is. But I am always amazed at how willing people are, people with nothing, well, we think they have nothing, how willing they are to give from what they do have. And I could hear that that also touched your heart too, from your trip. And it always amazes me how willing people are to give that have so little. And that just also puts us in such a place of gratitude for what we have, and that when we get ready to, even my heart breaks even for my own family there when they talk about the rolling power outages, and we take for granted that we could just come into the house and flip a light switch on and that everything's just going to be on, or that we could turn the water on and it's just gonna come on. And so when you come back home to the United States and you walk into your home, and maybe you had this experience too, where you walk into your home and you really have to shake that initial sense of guilt almost. I don't know if you've had that experience, where you feel a little bit guilty that you have access to so much and that your life is so different than the people that you spent so much time with. And then, but that kind of guilt is fruitless. So you have to figure out how to translate that into meaningful action, because just feeling bad doesn't do anything for anybody. So how can you translate that into meaningful action? And so I feel like what you're doing here with us, with Ecclesia, and sharing your journey with us and what it's going to do for your spiritual journey as a minister and pastor, that's translating that experience into something meaningful and tangible and measurable.
Thank you. Yeah. Jay, you have a response to that or a different thought?
Yeah, what December just shared reminded me last week I was in, we have a prison ministry and I go about once a month and do meditation with the guys in the prison. And we were having a discussion this past time, and one of them had lived in Haiti for a while. And, we were talking about life in the prison, and not really what anybody dreams of. And he said, yeah, but there's also another perspective. He said, I have clean water here. He said, the water in my toilet here is cleaner than the water that I drank when I lived in Haiti.
Mm.
That, that kind of shook everybody,
Mm-hmm.
Because they're not loving life in prison, but, it's like, oh, perspective. Like
Yeah.
they've got clean water.
Mm-hmm. The Greece conversation, I think I shared, well, one of the professors was walking with me and in Corinth and said, where we sit determines how we respond. And that kind of speaks to what Jay's talking about. That perspective is shaped by so much of our lives. And he was trying to help the students be much more aware of from where they were sitting and observing and experiencing in that Greece trip. And yet on the other side of that, these folks that, you're talking about the gratitude of just these folks' generosity, and they I really felt that these folks understand what it means to be the body of Christ in the world. Because even coming from, in some cases, horrific conditions, they still fed us. They still opened their homes to us and shared their stories. They still found moments of joy and laughter and hope. And they were sharing it all so generously. Um, we talk about seeing the image of God in another person, and how that's easy sometimes, and with depending on the person, sometimes that's extra hard. But that's the challenge for Christians, is to recognize that. And that changed my perspective in a lot of ways too, is when I try to see someone through that lens, not just the lens and being aware of my own perspective. But I felt like I got there, and it wasn't too long, maybe just the second day, I just kept saying, these folks get it. And I don't know if it's the United States. I don't know if it's just the American culture. I don't know if it's just where I live in the United States. I don't know. I just know that I felt more embraced, accepted, loved, um, I felt like I was part of their community, even though I was a total stranger and had just arrived. And I can walk into a lot of different types of gatherings, and unfortunately, some of those at churches, and not feel that. And but I really felt it there. I just feel like when they understand what it means to be in koinonia. And so anyway, it was just a very, very transformative trip for me. And we'll see where it goes because I I don't know if this is will open other doors. I don't know if this is developing my theological disposition more toward global ministry, which fits with Ecclesia and what we do, certainly. Um, I just know that I will never ever forget this trip.
Michelle,
And
I just want you to reflect the next few weeks. Um,
you want me to what? So I
uh,
said,
to reflect this back-to-back East-West dichotomy or the binary views of civilizations and our faith. Greece and Europe, and then immediately following you're in the East. Uh, how did that challenge your mental faculties, your physical stamina, and what did it teach you? Um, those kind of You're already pointing out some uh, observations in human nature. Uh, just theologically, I would like you to kind of reflect on the comparative aspects of your two trips.
mm,
One to the deep historical, almost like anthropological excursion into Christian faith, following the footsteps of St. Paul or the apostle. I don't know how you cast it, and then you look at, bare missionary experience of going through the jungles of Philippines, literally, having, that country has seen trauma too, right? I mean, Spanish conquest, and World War II and the American colonization. I mean, these are like, where is the United States and where is Spain? And why Philippines was subjugated
mhm.
for hundreds of years under this. Just like, the kind of a miscarriage of history, literally. I think the historical progression was sabotaged and kind of derailed by the colonizer, and how that is besought by the natives now, both in
Yeah,
of Asian jungles and cities and towns and villages, and how Greece is upheld as the birthplace of Western civilization. It's like the two contrasts are incredibly powerful that you actually were fortunate to go back to back,
Yeah, I've been thinking about the fact that Greece was originally a trip to Turkey, to the ancient church sites of Paul and John of Patmos. And when that trip didn't happen, everybody was so disappointed. But I couldn't help but wonder what it was about Greece that I was going to take away that was a bigger impact for me personally. Because while I still want to go to Turkey, I
Mhm.
really feel that it happened the way it needed to happen for me. I don't know that I would have had the same experience in Turkey. I wouldn't walked away with the same lesson of accompaniment in Turkey that I did in Greece and the Philippines. And that's the thread that ran through both of them. Yes, we saw Greece from the underbelly, and we saw the Philippines from the underbelly. And while that was not the plan there was no coordination, two completely different organizations, that I traveled with. But what I realized was just how that part of human nature to dominate, that leads to all the colonization and all of that is, it's that is, that empire always dominates and wins. And I got to see it historically, and I got to see it, in modern times still happening, and of course reflecting on the Native Americans as well. But the idea of accompaniment is really the thread for me that worked both in both places, because what what's easy to see in Greece is the surface stuff. Well, we know that the churches started there. We know that it's the birthplace of democracy. There's great ideals, but we know that every great civilization, Greece included, was built on the backs of slaves and those who had no power and or no authority, I should say. And so the what I recognized in Greece that I really didn't connect with, accompaniment until after the Philippines trip, was that Paul was teaching the people a way of living, a way of being in community that was accompaniment. When you realize that you're valuable and you realize that you have gifts that are considered part of this overall body of an ecclesia, where every part of the body has something to contribute and no one is indispensable, then you have to learn how to accompany each other in that space. I think we've gotten far away from that. But I think that's what he was trying to accomplish in those early days in Greece. And we know that accompaniment and solidarity, I loved the solidarity, because to me, solidarity is like, yeah, I got your back. I stand with you. I believe the same way. It's been kind of like that for me. Solidarity didn't have a really deep meaning for me until the Philippines, when she said solidarity, because it means something as solid is being done on another's behalf. So it's real action, tangible action. So accompaniment isn't just walking alongside and saying, I'm here for you, bro. It's like solidarity, where it's what can I do besides bringing hope and supporting you. It's what is the physical nature of my contribution.